So very much welcome. I'm speaking to the two audiences, the people online, and very much welcome also here to this space, especially after a long day, as the days have been long here. And thanks for being present. Initially, when you saw the advertising of these events, we have thought I just can't say two things, and this is the first one. When we advertise these events, we have thought of doing live streaming. So we would be here, but usually the live streaming is not so practical. There's some delay. Some people were suggesting if they could come and participate and do questions, come online. And so we switch. This was a decision of yesterday. Thanks to the technology, sometimes it's bad, but sometimes it's great. This is a very small device, but it's used as sounds and 360 degrees vision. So we were able to have participants online and people, the image they see, it's that image there. Wow. So it's and then we'll put, when it starts, we'll put that image in the front. So this would be the first thing, a warm word of welcome. And when we finish at the end, to stay a little longer and to share in a smooth or a nice and informal environment. This is the first thing. Second thing, just a word also of presentation of thankfulness for the people who are here. So my name is Filipe Martins. I am a Jesuit. I come from Portugal, so I have a same language speaker friends there. I come from Portugal, but I'm based in Brussels with this double hat. On one hand, I'm director of a social center there, a Jesuit social center in Brussels. We coordinate a lot with many of your institutions, with CITSE, with Caritas, or with Laudato Si movements, with a lot of partners. On the other hand, I also have the hat of being the European coordinator and the social and ecology work. So the European coordinator, we have coordinators in different continents, and so I also have this role. And in this sense, the second thing I want to say, these events for which we have the luck, so on climate change and climate migration, we have the luck of having with us Samuel, of having our companion York. We also have another Jesuit companion here, Cristobal from Chile. So we are several continents here, and also Colum will maybe say just a word of what we do. And just this word, Summon for You is also new for the first time. So the Jesuits typically have been present in COPs and also here in Bonn, but very much only with their institutions, which in a sense, if I can say so, it's a pity, because if we coordinate, we have so many things in so many different places. For the first time, we're doing this big COP30 campaign to do like this. And if you go to, and I'll put it at the end, or we'll send an email to you, ecojesuits.com. And so the page is there. This is the first thing. Just the other thing, thank you also, especially when I look here at Lydia, that looks very tired. Where is Winnie? Winnie is also here. Yeah. Okay. They have been coordinating a big group. So if at the end we just have one beer and one sandwich, please let's leave it. And Winnie, because they have been all this effort of coordinating every day. And that's the second thing. We're also here, and thanks for answering our questions. I think we're learning. The conversation I had with Rowan the other day was the same thing. We are also learning with ones of you. We have been accompanying this process for long. So this is it, to explain the bigger campaign. Now we have this event and the word of welcome. I pass the floor to Colin.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Let's just go through the format of the event. So we'll have two presentations from Samuel and George, and then we will literally open up to the floor. Make this more of an informal conversation. I understand if you're anything like me, you might be a little bit bored of panel discussions by this point. So that means you're extra welcome for coming. So this is my first time at SB62, and I think one of the things which has really struck me is how much the negotiations are focused on money, and I think perhaps it shouldn't have surprised me. And I think that's what we're going to try and sort of go through today. The link between money, migration, and climate change. So tonight we have two distinguished guests who will attempt to link the financial and the populist sentiments which are increasingly happening at these sort of conferences. So just to introduce them. So Samuel Zuidi Hagos, is that how I would say your name? You're a researcher based at the German Center for Integration and Migration Studies, and you're based at the Dazen Institute. You have a PhD in forced migration, and you're working on climate-induced displacement with a focus on agency of displaced people and the differences between local practices and international initiatives. You were born in Ethiopia, you're based in Berlin, and you used to be a humanitarian aid worker. And I also have noted down here you have a passion for football. And we welcome Dr. Jörg Elt. You have a PhD on the topic of illegal migrants in Germany. You worked at JRS for many years, and you were part of the team which won a Nobel Prize for initiating a campaign for banning landmines. For many years, you worked at Jesuit Worldwide, that's the International Development Agency of the Jesuits in Germany. And for a lot of that, you were focusing on the link between tax justice and poverty. You're a committed climate activist. You are engaging with Fridays for Future and doing lots of climate activism thing. You've even been imprisoned for that. But if you want to know more about that, you can ask it in the questions.
He's just out of
just out of prison. You're currently based in Nuremberg, working at the Ukama Center. You're also a Jesuit priest, and I have noted here that your favorite color is blue. And just to start off, like I said, the format is two short presentations, no more than 10 minutes, and then we open to the floor. Which one would like to begin? Okay, Samuel, you're up first.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. And do you mind to open my presentation? Okay. I mean, today I am focusing on the naturalization of the climate-induced disaster. And thank you very much. You can go to the next slide. And this is, yeah, you know, I mean, if we continue riding on the current carbon emission, carbon intensive economy, then at the end of 2100, we kind of reach 22.7 degrees, higher than the pre-industrial time. That means that this could render some of the area uninhabitable, especially the tropical areas, and then the Saharan region. You can see these shadow areas could be cannot be habitable for people. So this kind of affect many peoples. Millions could be displaced, forced to leave their livelihood, way of life, and their ecosystem, and they can it can destroy the social life and livelihood of millions of people. So this is to give you, I mean, this is not, I mean, it's not this displacement and climate change is not abstract in a horizon, but currently, you know, as we speak, currently, those countries in the Horn of Africa affected by this climate-induced disasters, especially the drought, failure of rainfall for 5 consecutive years, already displaced millions of people, mostly internal displaced people. Some people also cross the international borders, especially here in the southwestern part of Ethiopia, Somalia, and then Kenya. These are some of the IGAD region. This has been our focus for our research cases, and millions already have lost their livelihood and also forced to leave their natural habitual areas. So despite all these factors, and the millions are still displaced, and there is a tendency, even those working for, to mitigate the impact of climate change-induced disasters, they call those desertification process and drought in the whole of Africa. There is a tendency to frame this disaster as natural disaster. So our focus for this research, we talked to the people, 16 individuals working in the IGAD region at the intersection of climate change and migration, climate change adaptation and migration issues, and then try to understand how these climate-induced disasters are constructed, contested, and negotiated. And we also talked to 7 individuals in Germany who have been working at the nexus between climate change and climate change mitigation agendas, climate change adaptation agendas, as well as migration. So then, based on our empirical data, we try to capture the reflection of our interlocutors, and then they say that one of, for example, an expert working at the grassroots level framed that there is a tendency to frame those droughts in a Horn of Africa and recurrent drought with high intensity and scale, as well as the desertification process, as natural phenomena. So this kind of tend to obscure the anthropogenic or human-induced factors. And media also, and sometimes also those working on the emergency response, they tend to frame these disasters in the Horn of Africa, particularly, as kind of natural disasters. This mostly lead, shift the focus from working on long-term adaptation issue to focus on humanitarian intervention, emergency intervention, which doesn't change that much the situation. And there is also a tendency to frame this thing as, apparently inevitable events. It's natural events that can happen. So there is also this kind of deflecting responsibility from the more emitters country to those people who are affected by this climate change induced disasters. And then there is a shift responsibility, and then there is a tendency also to frame, okay, this is happening, people are displaced, not because of climate change, because of conflict, because of the weakness of the institutions, because of poverty. And then there is throwing the responsibility back to those who are affected by the climate change. So it's kind of, there is in this framing, there is a tendency to exonerate the emitters and then try to throw the responsibility, the ball of responsibility taking to the court of those who are disproportionately bearing the impact of climate change. And then also there is also this blame game. Individuals, insufficient adaptation, lack of resilience from the community is the reason, instead of trying to understand and then, okay, it is our activity, it is our way of life, it is our industrial process is causing somewhere disruption in their way of life and then forcing them to leave their livelihood and then their normal, natural, habitual environment. So there's also kind of depoliticize this thing, and then the question of institutional setup, the current institutional landscape, and the structural conditions that is making the people more vulnerable to the climate-induced disasters, and there is tendency to push back to question the existing structural situation, global situation, multilateral system that is at the heart of inequality. So, I mean, despite all this such context and pessimism, there is also hope that there is, at least after long fight, there is a tendency to understand through loss and damage the responsibility. Yeah, there is a kind of anthropogenic causes of this. They recognize through this loss and damage initiatives that there is more and more recognition that the emission here, the industrial activity, way of life is causing somewhere displacement or causing somewhere losses and causing somewhere damages. So there is kind of, from this, one could argue that there is some positive direction after a long fight. And also there is a tendency to set up structural systems, structural way of addressing this, especially there is more and more focus on adaptation. There have been more disproportional focus on mitigation. And there is a tendency to the leaning many countries also talking about, at least they are talking about to give more focus on the loss and damage. And promising pathways, this is loss and damage. And one thing it's about scaling up the funding and then putting structural system, which is also can recognize the role of those communities affected by climate change-induced disasters, and also the funding source, reinforcing the funding source is one issue. And there is at least there are some communities, especially non-government organizations and private individuals who are working to get the message of the individuals, the communities affected by climate-induced disaster, to get their message across international community. Yeah, this is, for me, it is one of the pathways that the international community could build on. And in the regional, especially when you look at the Pacific Climate Mobility Protocols, when you look at Kampala Conventions, some of the countries which are disproportionately and bearing this the brunt of these global emissions, they are taking very proactive actions in terms of, I mean, mostly the international, those spaces, these countries, those spaces have been the space of testing international norms. They have never been the space of producing international norms. They haven't been shaping that much international norms. Now they are taking the Pacific Island countries, they are taking initiatives to protect the climate change induced migrants, to protect their dignity, and then also the right of individual to live and to lead their life in their habitual situation, to adapt there. So there are this kind of both, especially from this Pacific Island initiatives, we can see they put adaptation as a strategy, migration also considered as a strategy of adaptation. They decriminalize migration, the discourse which is centered as securitizing and criminalizing migrants are now decentered by those initiatives. The international community can learn from those kind of initiatives and then try to embed those initiatives to ensure that the communities who have been bearing the brunt of those global warming, they can be protected. They should not be criminalized for forcefully leaving their own countries and their spaces. So, and as I also mentioned, that these initiatives are also put human face on resilience building at the grassroots level. They focus, and then mostly people, they don't like to move unless they are forced to move. And there is a kind of predominantly assumption that all people want to move. They don't want to move, majority of them, they want to stay. But the way of life, the industrial process are forcing them to move. So it is the international community could build on those initiatives and then try to protect those who deserve protection. Yeah, thank you very much.
And Maggie, as I said, the format of this is you probably will have loads of questions, but we will wait for a moment to start the discussion after Jorg's presentation. But in the meantime, thank you so much for that, Samuel.
Yes. We'll share.
The floor is yours, George.
Okay, yeah. You see the title which we had for tonight, Humanitarian Justice, Economic or Security Challenge. Of course, all of it. But the question is, what is the best frame to get most money for the loss and damage fund, which we have already? And my feeling is that humanitarian justice arguments are no longer important. But what about economic and security challenges? I start with what although Samuel was saying already, the global north is trying to avoid its responsibility by trying to talk about climate migration as a big threat to Europe. Billions of people are coming. And yeah, let's talk about climate refugees. But as a island state, Pacific Island ambassador said already, while it might be appropriate to consider that potential climate refugees need protection options for relocation, this position might then leave open the option that major industrial powers could continue to engage in unsustainable practices, knowing that a solution, relocation, would be forthcoming for future refugees. So let's talk about refugees and not talk about mitigation. Next one. And all this takes place in a growing populist society where you can win elections, especially in Western countries. This is one of the many empirical studies about this phenomenon. Around the world, right-wing populist authoritarianism is on the rise. Fearing mass migration, voters have increasingly flocked to anti-immigrant populism. This comes alongside a rise in climate-driven migration. And this trend could have devastating consequences for democracy, human rights, and life itself. And this makes it very dangerous, because we are talking about scapegoating, and avoiding the issue. When even the German Federal Secret Service says, for the German Federal Secret Service, climate change with its impact such as destabilization and migration is one of the 5 major threats our country is facing. So here you have climate change and climate migration, and Germany is in a better situation. Go to next. Yeah, and we as humanitarian organizations, we always have to ask again, are migrants the problem or the consequence of problems? And how can we shift the focus in the debate, and how can we reframe the debate as good as possible? I hate this discussion, but we have to adjust to the facts. Yeah, indeed, climate change is a threat to security, stability, welfare of the global north, and this independently of migration. There are limitations to economic activities outside rooms with air conditioning. Impacts will also be on jobs here in Germany. Who is removing the garbage? Who is repairing our streets? Who is harvesting the fields? I mean, all these people can't live in air-conditioned rooms anymore if climate change continues. and food production, resource exploitation. Germany and all the Western states have economies who depend on resources from countries who are affected by climate change and possibly are no longer possible to live in. What about the global sharing of labor, our trade chains? The possibilities to sell the stuff which Germany is producing. If in poor countries governments are collapsing, nobody will have the money to buy our beautiful cars anymore. And what about the communal and regional governance structures in poor countries who have to secure regional and local stability, which is essential to help people adapting to what is approaching us? So that's why we can note that there are a number of unusual suspects warning that climate change is indeed a risk. The World Economic Forum study, for example, points out in 23 that climate change is costing the world 16 million per hour. This sounds great. Or if you have the climate, the global risk report of the World Economic Forum, climate change is always ranking among the top short-term and middle risks. Next one. The International Chamber of Commerce studies that extreme weather costs the economy 2 trillion over the last decades. Next one. Consumer Report studies that climate change could cost each American born today 500,000 in welfare losses. Next one. The Swiss reinsurance. I mean, the insurance companies were the first saying, well, look, climate change is something very bad because we can't insure the risk anymore, which you have in Florida already. Who's buying a house in Florida nowadays doesn't find insurance anymore. So the Swiss insurance again said that climate change is an evolving threat not only to our financial ability to stem the costs, but to international security. And even the European Union External Service says that there is a climate and security nexus, and there are quite a number of critical risks to tackle. And even NATO says that environment, climate change, and security, there was a special report for our defense forces. So it is very clear that governments nowadays, experts realize that there is a problem and there is a wisdom in investing in the root causes of all this before costs spiral out of control. So we had this wonderful national interdisciplinary climate risk assessment in Germany by the Federal Secret Service, the University of the Armed Forces, and our government, saying that investments in mitigation and adaptation should not be considered only in terms of the associated challenges and costs. Rather, they represent investments leading to welfare gains. What is not safe now through successful mitigation and adaptation will cause exponentially higher costs in the years and decades ahead. So here you can get the governments where they can put the money to their pledges. And indeed, a discussion of security, stability, and welfare, which was initially sparked off by the fear of the rising migration tide, can be also used in these kind of conferences to shift the focus towards the real risks to security, stability, welfare, and then to advocate more financial spending in mitigation adaptation worldwide. And this does not only benefit the global north and the global north-south, but also migrants. So it's a win-win-win situation for all. But of course, there is a danger to it. Go down to the red. Down, down, down. Yeah, the risk is the populists know all this already. In America, President Trump prohibited the United States Secret Services to treat climate change any longer as a national security threat. So by presidential decree, climate change as a threat to America disappeared. And the same, the last one, the populist policy of Donald Trump also threatens the pledges which important economic institutions had. For example, the biggest US banks had wonderful pledges how to get green until 2030. But given the policy of Donald Trump, they said, well, it doesn't really make sense if we as banks try to have a green policy. We just have to think about our shareholder and we invest in air conditioning. Yeah? So if you have a populist government, also the economic sense is losing its conviction. So I conclude. There is a small window of opportunity to exploit growing fears in the global north regarding security, stability, and welfare caused by climate change, but not because of climate migration, but because of all the other root causes who threaten both poor countries and potential migrants and the global north alike. So we have a small window to exploit these fears of security, stability, and welfare to trigger more investment into mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage funds, and all the rest of it. But we have to do it fast because populists trying to close this option as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Joel and Samuel. I thought those two presentations really complemented each other. And this idea of the politicization of the systematic causes of migration, which you were talking about, Samuel, and this idea that the global north is trying to avoid a debate through a debate. And obviously, we're all here, the people are here in person. We're here at SB62 to engage in a debate, to engage in negotiations. So just to kick off this sort of question and answer session, I want to ask this question. So does what we've heard today link in any way to the interests which brought you here to Bonn today? So the concerns, the politicization, populism, migration. Now, you've all come, you've traveled, some people from many distances. You all come to Bonn today. You know, what are the links which have brought you here, which connect to this? Anyone? Please, David.
Yeah, so I connected, of course, with both presentations, but the aspect of internally displaced persons that was presented by Sam, I think is closer home to me, I think, than the rest, and not to overlook, of course, the immigration that's happening cross-border, trans-border, and internationally as well. I say this because there is a strike when we were studying migration in secondary school and all that. It was in pursuit of better life in the urban centers. But now, in our country especially, we are seeing the reverse. People are running away from the urban centers because then it's no longer even possible to live there. But where do they run to? The climate-induced impacts now leave them, in a sort of a quagmire. They cannot live in the city. They can't go back home because they are more prone to death, literally. We used to laugh that, when life is too hard for you in Nairobi, you go back to the village. That's what you were told. It used to be a joke. It looks like life is beating you up in Nairobi. Go back to the village. Now it's worse in the village because then, even the livestock, the crops, there's nothing that is reliable about them. The story is the same in Ethiopia and the greater horn of Africa. I mean, and it's, I like what it's been presented as. It's no longer an economic issue, just an economic issue. It's not just a security issue anymore. I think it's more sophisticated than all the terms you could put together in English. Because it's the breaking of cultures, the killing of social lives. When a village like, or an island in Beira is wiped out, what do we do with those of us who are very connected to our ancestors that are buried in the land? What do we do? I mean, it's lost and damaged. That is lost completely. What are we going to do with that? Last year, we hosted a side event on environmental defenders and the COP. Last year, but one, in Dubai. And one young girl could not, hold it back when she said, I don't know my language, I don't know my heritage. I don't know my people. I don't know what to tell my children when I have them, because they were forced out of where they used to stay because of, again, climate and this migration. And migration is not the problem. The migrants are not the problem, sorry. I mean, it's just a phenomenon that we continually contribute by focusing on the text instead of the lives.
Any responses?
Not very true. I mean, there's a question whether you can only pay for economic damage, like the loss of house, or whether the loss of such a tradition like a burial place, whether this also requires some compensation. And I think it should, but of course it's absolutely un-Western thinking.
Yeah. And of course, compensation always comes in the form of, we are not going to try to reverse and stop, because that's better apology than gain some money. You lost your great grandfather's grave, gain some money, or you lost some traditional shrine. Go make another one somewhere, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I forgot. Just say your name and the organisation you
I'm
work
David Munene. I work with the Catholic Youth Network for Environmental Sustainability now.
and you've come here from.
I've come here from Kenya. I understand in Germany it's important for me to say that I am Kenyan who lives in Kenya.
I think you and it, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. My name is Victor Yanina. I'm Mexican, but I work for Caritas Internationalis and I'm based in Rome. And I want to share a couple of stories and make a comment. I have dealt as a Mexican diplomat in multilateral fora with international migration issues. Capital sin every time you have tried to include in any UN document related to international migration causes of migration. All global North countries against mentioning causes of migration, even before climate change was on top of the agenda internationally. They didn't want to know anything about causes. It was just about the effects, the consequences, how we are going to manage migration. And there was this kind of, how do you say this? Prayers that you repeat in Hindu.
Any Hindu
Mantra of migration management. But it was impossible for us developing countries to include a discussion, for the deep discussion about the causes of migration. And in climate change, I mean, forget about it. That is the joints a dream. Secondly, once working for the Scalabrinian congregation in Washington, D.C., with all the second, third generation Italians in an Italian parish, I was telling them, aren't you afraid of having an invasion of dirty, brown-skinned Latin Americans in your country? Yes, we are. Okay, perfect. So why don't you help us to keep them in their own region? And you are not invaded by these terrible people who is invading the US. No, we just help Italians. No will at all to help the Scalabrinian congregations with missions in all Latin America. So there is this thing of, let's say, right wing to, honestly, to me, this difference between right and wing, it every day is weaker as a source to explain things. But you have the nationalist, sovereignist against the more cosmopolitan, international liberal, whatever. But the ones who believe in this sovereignty, national interest, they won't help people in their country and outside their country. That is something I have seen, and it's just an element that I think we have to bear in mind. And thirdly, also, I'm so almost in shock now in Bonn. Today in Europe, you have the NATO summit, where all European countries are committing to invest 5% of their GDP in their defense budget. That is 700 billion. And nobody's talking about that here. How come? It's completely absurd from the security and defense point of view. Because if you want to protect yourself from Russian tanks, Russia won't use tanks to reach Berlin or Paris. They are going to use nuclear weapons, not tanks. If they are using tanks in Ukraine, it's because it's part of their own land. That's how they consider it. But if they want to have a serious conflict with Western Europe, they won't use conventional means. They are going to use nuclear means. So the idea that you are going to invest 700 billion in defense is absolutely absurd. And it's immoral that nobody is saying, how come instead of allocating at least 10% of this money, that would be 70 billion euros, for the loss and damage, or mitigation, or adaptation, you are saying in the negotiations that developing countries don't do enough to liberalize the economic ecosystem so private investors can put more money in these countries. It's just like shocking, It's like, it's not just Trump, the one who is out of his mind, There should be a kind of acceptance that it's not only him, but on this side of the Atlantic, there is also a kind of not very healthy state of mind, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to comment on your point that we should also talk about internet displacement, but also those can be rendered immobile because of the destruction of facilities and roads and all this because of climate-induced disasters. Some communities can be rendered immobile. So immobile people can also be, we should put into account when we try to address some of those affected by climate change. And as we speak, now only fraction of people are trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea from Africa. Majority of them, they are staying there. And also in Pacific Islanders, people are saying that they want to stay and they have less interest to move to other places. And that's why we need this kind of to support the international community, also listen to them. And the Refugee Convention in time of space and temporality, we consider it at the beginning of 1951, it means to protect the Europeans. So expanded. So these kind of the local initiative, if the African countries and also the Pacific Island, they reposition themselves to push in this direction for the protection of that, the global community can listen to the sound. It's also one gesture. The fight for the recognition of loss and damage fund took some years, and people fought for that. It's not for free. That not because they want to. The people fought for that, and then it's also reaching out to the communities, the people here in Europe, not only the political system, but the people can listen if we build, if you work on our framing, and then selling to the people to have more, to put human face. Like we need a global system which put the dignity of humankind into the policy negotiation and the freedom of humankind in policy negotiation. This needs effort and reaching out to the communities or here in Germany or elsewhere in this field and reaching out to the community, not only to politicians.
Thank you, Samuel. I think that's
My hope is that Trump is no longer the most famous American since Leo became Pope. Both Francis with Fratelli Tutti, as well as Prigoz's comments to J.D. Vance, makes me hope that Leo writes something for Berlin.
But we have to prevent J.D. Vance from visiting the Pope.
Before,
Yeah.
okay,
we don't,
okay.
we don't want any more Americans killing the Pope. So we've got 5 more questions, but I just thought that was an interesting observation about internal displacement. When I was at a talk yesterday, it was saying 84 million people internally displaced last year in 2024 because of climate change. Who was first under the 5? Shall we go? Yeah, you were.
Thank you very much for these enlightening submissions that you've given us. I am Angelina Amatutu-Mensah. I'm from Ghana. I worked for the Environmental Protection Authority. I'm retired, but I have the mandate to negotiate for government of Ghana. And I have a CSO. I believe the latest newborn baby, just about 1.5 months old, that is looking into migration, looking into critical minerals, fair trade, and looking into innovations. I'm going to look at your presentations from a different perspective. We always say that migration in our space is climate induced, and then we look at natural disasters or disasters. By the way, I negotiate on an agenda item called response measures, which is not very popular, but actually is the heart of the negotiation. It's looking at mitigation policies, measures, and instruments that is going to use to meet and combat climate change, looking at intended or unintended consequences. I'm going to just look at the 2 areas and connect to your presentation: economic diversification and just transition. Within the just transition, there's going to be job losses. Now, with these job losses, people migrate, but we've not looked at it from that angle. When you come to Africa, most of our solutions to climate issues is on the ground. Lithium, uranium, name them. And then, for some strange reason, when we started getting oil, we've been told to go to a low carbon economy. So all our oil is now on the ground, and there's going to be stranded assets. Now, those communities, what is going to happen to them? So from my perspective, I think that we need to broaden the scope to look at the job losses, stranded assets, where are people moving to? For example, this job losses, this new idea of solar vehicles that is coming to our countries. Apart from the fact that we may be a dumping ground, and there's going to be a lot of job losses from the whole cycle, from informal sector to the formal sector. What is going to happen to these people? So we need to broaden this discussion to look at how job losses also becomes a climate-induced agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Such a good point.
Your attention.
Any responses from?
I think also I wrote an article on this idea of this movement to less carbon intensive energy sources or green energy sources. We should consider I think this climate justice into this, because the European companies, who now the current system is also at the heart of inequality and injustice, right? And then the existing initiatives to decarbonize or to mitigate the impact should not be further facilitate these injustices and the domination of European or Chinese company. At least for this kind of effort should be accompanied by this joint venture system. For example, the Kenyan companies can be supported by European companies. They can together work on solar energy instead of exporting solar energy. Then in Kenya, that can be a source of employment. That can be a transition in terms of knowledge sharing, in terms of also narrowing the injustice already, the global economic injustice already existing. So this kind of initiative should be accompanied by private, not only about the political state-to-state intervention, but also collaboration between African companies and European companies, private companies. And then it should also include knowledge transfer, technology transfer to those companies, and they to work together to also support the local economy.
If you and then you, and then you and then you. Okay, so please.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Dolphin. I'm also from Kenya. So I can contribute on two parts. I think the issue of migration spoke to my heart because I think we overlook what we call the out of school children in terms of internal migration. And according to research by UNICEF in Kenya 2019, around 2.5 million learners were out of school. And these are in regions that are, of course, climate vulnerable to drought and that. So that really resonates with me, and that could be part of the loss and damage discussion around non-economic losses. And also, I think we forget to mention loss of lives, which should be able to quantify and see other than that. So apart from that, I'll jump into finance a bit. I've followed finance quite for some time, basically. And I wish it was as beautiful as Monene, my counterpart, has made it sound like, oh, you lost your piece of land, here's some money. It really doesn't work like that. I wish it did, but it really doesn't work like that. Because when you talk about the whole concept of, first of all, environmental finance, before you come into climate finance, it is a co-financing mechanism. You must have money to get money. So in Rio, we agreed you're supposed to mobilize domestically 60% of the money, then the environmental finance is 40%. When it comes to climate finance, this is where, the rubber meets the, whatever it is. We have the GCF, we have especially the GCF, which is the most prominent one, basically. So for you to have GCF, you must already have 60% of that money, basically. So accessing the GCF is not something that, any local community can just go, yeah, GCF is money, I'm affected, and it happens like that. It is, for lack of better term, for big corporations like IUCN. So you say they're not here. Why IUCN? IUCN is a big entity, big money, and they already have 60% of it, and we don't talk about the quality of finance. Yes, we agreed that in the Paris Agreement developed, we give money developing, but first of all, we've never agreed on defining what is climate finance to give it. It can be anything. So that becomes the first hand. The second hand is the quality. They're giving you money. They didn't say the quality. So most of it, sorry to say, is in terms of loans. So why should you create a problem, basically, and when you're supposed to help me to deal with it, you have to pay back. Pay back for what? A problem that you created. So you look at even the quality of financing that comes, basically, it becomes, it's mostly loans. Right now, Kenya is implementing FLOCA program, financing locally the climate action. It is a loan from the World Bank, so you have to pay back. So there are two issues. There's availability and access. Even access
going in your mouth. So that's why Gujarat is very near to Mount Abu.
It will take you like 3 years. If you apply today, 2025, the earliest to get it is 3 years. They are trying to fast track it. And in 3 years, it's already worse. And who is going to access it? It's going to be the big corporations. So, yes, sometimes the text is there, but I feel like sometimes we get so lost into when a politician comes and say, as the EU, we are committed. They say that because it is verbally on TV and cameras, we are committed to supporting climate action. But when you go to the negotiation where it is supposed to be binding, basically, they are sort of trying to kill long-term mobilization of climate finance, get out of it. And right now, they're introducing the SB62, which means that basically they're going to make everybody contribute to this climate finance model. So it's a bit there and here, and I really do that. There, Brenda says, here's the money, but it is not that easy.
Before our next question, I heard you laughing there, George.
No, I mean, just let the others speak. I mean,
Just
we are
if I
talking
may
about.
add, and after the question, but also to invite people who are connected with us online, raise your hand in case you have questions. So
Unless you're my parents, then you can't answer it. Please.
I just would add a lot on that, then because on top of that, it's the year of the NDCs, the National Determining Contributions, and we learned today that about 90% of the NDCs is voluntary, it's not binding. So, I mean, the whole thing of 35 years of negotiating things since 97, the Kyoto Protocol, it's all written down, but the mechanisms are not at the core issue of justice, of climate justice. The ones who suffer the most are the least responsible. I mean, basics that we are saying 35 years are not taken into consideration in the negotiations. And this is something that really drives me mad. But positive note, as I said today in the Catholic coordination meeting, and I loved it, thanks Lydia for facilitation, brilliant facilitation. I think I'm missing clear, outspoken faith voices in this debate. We are still like as if we are at the fence. We are watching it. Say, oh, don't let us get too dirty with these things. They are a bit like things. This is not what I'm expecting from prophetic voices. Either we are sticking to our conviction and we are speaking out for the ones who suffer the most and cannot even afford to come here.
Yeah.
Not just because of visa regulations, because of money also. Then we are not at the core. And for that, we need credibility. How do we generate credibility as faith actors? In putting the things on the table that we have. I said today, I'm repeating myself since 30 years, the Catholic Church is the biggest landowner in the world and the biggest real estate owner in the world. What do we do with these values? Are we putting it on the table and are we saying together, we withdraw our money out of the fossil fuel industry with the Vatican Bank? We withdraw our money with our real estates, with all what we have from, we're using our land to install renewables. This will give us a credibility and allow us to see moved into that direction, but we are not there. We are still far away from the reality. And we are not taken seriously also because of that. So I think we have to speak up and we have to put on the table what we have to get this credibility and to be heard in a very different tone than yet.
Yes, thank you very much. I think a lot has been spoken and derived.
So your name and where you're coming from.
Hilary is I come from Uganda, from the Northern Director Caritas, Uganda. My issue is about, I've been following a little bit of technology, climate change. And from the discussions around, we happen to sit in one of the finalization of the document, and you would feel the sentiments on the verbs that were being used to establish some of the indicators. And a lot of it, for me, this is my take. A lot of it is that some participants are using this forum to create a market for their products from the suffering communities. And with the technology, you can tell, we already have a good example. We are implementing a technology of EcoCup cooking stores. These EcoCup stores, yes, the pilot demonstration started from Uganda. Because our technology was not good enough, we had to bring in our counterparts from Denmark. They built it up, and as a private company, and guess what? We are selling this EcoCup to the refugees.
That's shameful.
Still, you can see the mindset is not about fighting climate change. It's business. A good example, another good example is about, remember, she was alluding to the Paris Agreement, which was, and some of the guys that were there were like, okay, we have been giving a lot of money to third world countries and they can't grow enough food, and we are going in 2050, we shall have 9 billion people. So give the money to us, we'll grow enough food to feed the population. Yes, and a lot of multi-corporate organizations were awarded these monies. Some of them have been awarded the monies, some of them are still struggling, and then small-scale farmers are not given even these monies. Now, number one, by not allowing these small-scale farmers to work, you are taking away their human dignity. The reason why we exist is because we can work and we can support other families, our families. So you stop them from working, they are going to be slaves for life. They will have no responsibility over what they eat. Besides, the food that is grown in third world countries does not remain in third world countries. It comes back and we buy it at a very, very high cost. So these are issues that we need to also be thinking about. Professionalization of the small-scale farmers. If you need a good pineapple, teach me how to grow the best pineapple for you, and then you get it. Rather than say, stop growing, let me do it for you. I think these are the issues that we as a Catholic Church and other faiths should also work on. 3, from this whole discussion, we are talking about money. There is no soul in this discussion. There is no conscience in this discussion. So which means it's all about this, okay? But actually what is going to change the climate we are talking about is the soul, is the will. And that can be given to everyone. So that's my submission. Thank you.
No, thank you. Any quick comments? Please.
Lisa Sullivan, Mary Knoll from the United States, which is NOAA United. But just great appreciation. You know, we're coming from all these days of being in the weeds of all this climate negotiation, and just to hear the essence of what climate change, the effect of it. And I think it was just really important to all of us to hear your testimony. And as we're debating, what do we do as faith groups? I mean, it is so clear that it's those most affected, right? That's what Pope Francis showed us. And so I feel like it's missing in our dialogue, the word, should we add climate migration, or in what way should we be adding that to our agenda, you know, as Catholics here and working on the COPs. But I also want to thank you for the very beginning when you talked about the language we use. You know, natural disaster, it just puts the blame where it shouldn't be. And so I just need to think about our language and about the focus on climate migration as we think of where we should focus our attention. So gratitude for your presentation.
Oh yes, you haven't gone yet. Oh, and then you. Sorry, you had your hand up for ages.
I will give you 2 options.
Your name and where you're from?
My name is Daniela Blaniste from Caritas Latin America and the Caribbean. I have a reflection to bring and for a practical matter to bring. What do I bring? Because we don't have much time. So no, the reflection.
Decide on time.
Okay, I try to be short, but my reflection is about the interconnection between the different issues. And this is something it is very, very much in Laudato Si. And this is actually one of the main insights of Laudato Si when the Pope Francis talks about the social, the environmental crisis and say that things are connected. And we can see that in the ground when we observe the suffering of the people. To bring a case that I know closely, which is the case of Haiti. 15 years ago, there was an earthquake in 2010. Not to speak about the story of Haiti, the history of Haiti, which is a slavery one, and we may know about that, but just to start on the earthquake 15 years ago. After the earthquake, many things happened that helped to weaken the institutions of Haiti and the social links between people. And all of this allowed the violence and the organized crime to come in. So now, 15 years later, there is a big problem about migration, displaced people, and it is said in the media, in this simplifying narrative, that it is because of violence and that it is because of a lack of ability to get organized from the Haitian people, and lots of things that are stigmatizing them. And actually, there was an earthquake 15 years ago that has to do with what is going on today there. But we lack the long-term approach, so we miss those things, and we really get to believe that what it is happening in Haiti has to do with the narco crime organized thing. So it would be interesting from the church, because we are there in the grounds, that we could build evidence-based cases showing those interconnections between peace, climate change, and how people are being affected by interconnected causes. Apart from that, I want to bring the practical proposal, which is that I think we should have a plan to advocate at COP35 together, starting with COP30. If we do not do that, whatever we do at COP30, it is going not to be meaningful at all, unless we are really wanting to have a goal a little bit farther, starting now. So this is what I would do.
This is a proposal, a 5-year plan for COP30. Anyone have a positive response to this?
Laudato Deo. Also, Pope Francis said, if this kind of COP doesn't prove itself worthy of progress, we should find another avenue. And he brought the process as an example of alternative. He brought the process when we banned the anti-personnel landmines. There was also a big UN process which doesn't bring us anywhere. So a coalition of willing, together with NGOs, started a separate process, which proceeded much further, much quicker. So there is a precedent in history, even though these achievements nowadays are turned back, since many people who are part of this process are leaving it again. But again, we have papal backing for such a proposal. I also want to, what stuck to my mind is that we as church have to be serious and put our essence on the table. That's fine. And I think we can do a lot within our church, because we have an institutional structure which is present all over the world. So we can channel money from rich countries into poor countries via the bishops, the caritas, and whatever, and try to waste as little as possible to corruption. But the question then is, are we only assisting our Christian Catholic brothers and sisters, or are we also looking into all the other needy people? And then the question is, do we have enough resources to help all? That's okay. And another thing came to my mind when you said, yeah, we need to be prophetic. Fine. You don't have to forget that I try to be prophetic, yeah. And even the German bishop sneaked up behind me and said, "Father, you are the prophetic face of the German church." But don't expect me to say this in public. Because prophetic action also polarizes. And one of the big assets we have right now in Pope Leo is also Francis was prophetic and he was polarizing. And Francis was not taken serious by many after a couple of years. Now we have again a Pope who can talk to conservatives and to the leftists alike. Yeah? So if Leo also now starts to become prophetic, who is then the bridge builder in our world? So whatever good suggestions there are risks to it. But I mean, given the slow progress of these kind of processes, of course, my personal inclination also is we need to be credible and more radical. But I'm also shying the risks. There are risks.
Philippe.
I would have, well, as you said, a short reflection and a question, especially for you, Jörg, and also how you, Samuel, see the role of Jörg. So to contextualize, there's a center here in Germany called the Center for Social Ecological Transformation. So where Jörg works, we had a meeting there some weeks ago, and there's something I heard there that still resonates, and I don't have an answer. This is reflection and no go. I like very much the discourse of prophets, being prophets, maybe because of my bad temper as well, is a good justification for my bad temper.
Yeah.
But someone there was sharing something that I've been thinking about. Maybe it's the time to have prophets on one hand. It's important to exist. They point to something that does not exist yet and should be in place. But it's also a time for wisdom, for the wise people who can make alliances with other people that maybe don't think exactly alike, but are open to listen to us. And this I found interesting. I don't have a solution to this working together, just to put it on the table to share something that has been coming to my prayer also. The second question would be to Jörg. So as you said, Jörg was arrested, was in prison 35 days. Actually, I'm going to joke with you. When we thought this event, I said, but Jörg, no one will come to see a criminal.
We can do that.
But if you're, because I find very interesting, I don't know if I would do all the things. So we are companions, we joke with each other. I don't know if I would do all the things, but it kind of questions me. Can you explain a little bit, Jörg, so how you came close to these groups, what they do, and why do you think it's meaningful what they keep doing? That would be my question.
Well, two points were essential that I became what I am. The first was a hunger strike of 6 young people ahead of our federal election in 2021. So 6 people went on indefinite hunger strike, saying that they want politicians in Germany discuss not only about economy and Corona, COVID, and inflation, but also about climate change in the global south. And I really was impressed by these 6 young people. And we are friends by now. And he started the movement of young radical people who started with getting food out of dustbins and started blocking roads, started attacking targeted artwork with a message and all these kind of things. And the second reason why I did it was the Jesuits from the global south, from Kenya. A Jesuit working in Kenya told me that these kind of acts of civil disobedience in the global north are the last chance left to bring the voice from the global south to the German public. Because the Jesuit argued that, of course, the global north is creating a problem, the global south is suffering, and the global south doesn't have a voice in getting this problem corrected. But if young people are blocking roads in Germany, it is a wonderful symbol of what climate change is all about. Disruption of daily life, by extreme weather, by drought, by landslides, whatever. So that's, that's the second impact why I started thinking of joining this movement, and the last one was when our government was breaking its own laws. So after the Paris Convention, Germany had a climate law, and the climate law said if a segment of public life does not live up to targets, they have to impose immediate measures to keep these targets. And our traffic minister always failed his target. But he could impose a speed limit. He could impose car-free weekends. So there were limits, and he refused to adopt them. And this was the point when I said, okay, if a government minister is permitted to break the law, then I'm also doing it. This was my first conviction. But what happened in the end, for this minister, the law was changed, and I had to go to prison.
Wow. Those online, I wanted to alert you.
So
There was a hand online.
No,
Stefan,
it was a pointer.
Okay, then I have something to just say.
but this
I think
this chap behind you has had his hand up since.
Okay.
I've
and then
been
Stefan.
Hi, everybody.
Online.
I don't know if you can hear me now. Can you hear me now?
We can. Thank you.
Great. Okay. I have a question. My name is Stefan. I'm working for Youth Equipment by the Nuremberg, just as Jörg does. And I also have a question to him right now. Jörg, as you said, populism is the big problem in the discussion in the countries of the global north. And I mean, how can you convince people on a broad scale without becoming populist yourself, or rather, what kind of narratives do we need? Because despite climate disasters in our own country and in Europe, climate change is not being recognized here as the serious problem it actually is. Thank you.
Well, I would answer with Ignatius. In the discussion, enter by the door of your opponent and lead him out your own door. So that's why I started my presentation with the fears the German populists have when facing migration as a security issue. Of course, I'm convinced that migration is not a security issue, but the consequence of other more serious problems. But if I succeed already in getting in touch with people and getting their ear and their attention, then I might have a bigger chance of convincing them of my point of view. So, we have sometimes maybe to adapt also some strategies which we don't like, but which are the avenues left to us.
We're running out of time, so one final question.
Yes, I have just one part question. I'm Lucas from Brazil, and my question is about if you, like, during these days in Bonn, if you're hearing anything on climate displacements, like we're following so many agendas about the mitigation working program or GGA or whatever else, and I didn't hear anything on climate migration. So just your point of view on it, if there is happening some discussion about it in any way, in any level, or no, it's totally invisibilized.
You haven't seen anything.
Or has anybody heard it in all the different negotiations?
I think as a study which was commissioned by the Katowice Committee on the Impact of Response Measures have the language of migrants in that. That's all that I can say. It's the language on migrants, but not really no agenda item on migration.
But I've seen 3 side events, and this is one of them. So
No, they're talking about the negotiation.
and the negotiation.
Yes, for example, when we take the GGA, the Global Goal on Adaptation, we have like almost 1,500 indicators. You know, if we have like at least one indicator on migration, like we have like so much, there is only one maybe like indicator on migration. No.
Yeah.
It seems automatic.
Yeah, I was in a side event. Oh, sorry, I will introduce myself. I'm Winnie Naluboa, working for Seed Save in Belgium, Brussels. I was in a side event this morning about climate migration, and this question quite came up. And from what I heard, there is no discussions on this topic in negotiations right now. And Brazil is not prioritizing this, so we may not expect it to happen in them.
Maybe I will be with it. If you have, usually have informal meeting of the co-presidency and the non-state actors, then you can lobby to have it in a cover decision so that in future engagements it's discussed as a agenda item. So also use political matters.
Last week I was able to attend the one meeting which is organized by Center for Climate Mobility, which is based in Berlin. We brought different leaders, political leaders, including head of states in Berlin last week, from 16th of June to 17th June. And it was impressive that specifically some African countries leadership took initiatives to lead the discussions, and countries from Pacific Island like Fiji and other Pacific Islanders, they were there to present their position and some research agenda. Germany also actively engaged in this discussion through the German ministry. So there is a kind of initiative to bring this agenda to political discussion. And the power of also social thing in your circle, this climate change and also the climate justice struggle will take age. It's about building enormous building also. It's about human dignity and the consideration that all deserves dignity, all deserves opportunity. This kind of thing, it is a generation, work in our circle, in our policy discussion, in our home, in our community. We can also work toward that end. We shouldn't wait for only the political platform or political spaces. We can use all available space for us to reach out to different people and to build this kind of normative. I believe in normative values that live and thrive the human dignity. So we can do that in our work, in our research, in our churches, in every corner. And then it needs like a long, persistent effort to have some kind of change. And I still optimist. I want to remain optimist. So I think you are well positioned, especially as a faith-based community, to reach out to many people, to reach out here in Germany, to reach out to high school, to talk to the people. The next generation can understand that and then have this value from values of climate justice.
But do I understand it right? It's not part of the negotiations.
Yeah.
But we're always talking about migration as a way to adapt to climate change. I don't get it.
Yeah, it's not a topic. Paris Agreement. I mean, in the preambular section where certain groups have taken, like indigenous people, now there's an agenda item there, just transition. It's unfair. But unfortunately, we don't have a strong migrant group. I think that is what is happening. So, like you rightly mentioned, it could be a cover decision, lobbying the chairs so that it could be taken as an agenda item. It can come from this group.
It can even be
I think with
because they have meetings with the country chair, the presidency, and everybody else.
No, it's here.
we're out of time. I encourage us to continue for those in
I
person.
don't know if a final question you wanted a very short question or comment.
A short comment. I'm Nico. I'm a retired earth science professor of Bonn University, and I think you're always talking about how can we convince the global north to behave different. And my answer is you cannot convince the global north because the global north depends on the crazy capitalist system with its need for economic growth. And now we build weapons We build weapons to maintain this system because we all have cars, and the Chinese don't buy our cars anymore. So what do? We build weapons because this will maintain our crazy system of economic growth. So there's no way to convince us. This is not equal. Only way is mass mobilization and disruptive protest. And this is why the other, and me too, why we have joined this we have tried to join this mass protest. It hasn't worked so far. Many of these movements have sorry.
I feel responsible and thank you for sharing what we If I may put, I will use, I don't know, if my joker as to close and invite everyone to stay. We still have to finish the beers and the sandwiches. Just to say in 30 seconds, something that I find very promising that we're promoting in Brussels. This issue of the rights of future generations. Some of our countries already have it implemented. We're implementing at the European level, and some others are not exploring this venue. Why is it important? Because on one hand, we're putting on the table a definition of a legal right. A legal right, usually it's considered the 7 generations. And the second thing, which is the question of loss and damage and many other questions, how do operationalize these rights? And now a good example is to look at Wales, and we're working on the same with the European Commission to see if it can be implemented. It's made operative through the Sustainable Development Goals. So how do we know a country is moving towards becoming sustainable when an annual report, as Wales do, Wales every year does a report on a set of that we're working towards. This just okay, I'll close this one. I would just put these notes, and I imagine most of us are faith related. And one of the nice experience we've been having also in Brussels is how, with this concern with our planets, we have been engaging, I think, with cities and also with others, how many non-faith-based actors, people coming from different places, also are moved by this wish of common roots. And this is for me and for SHS has been a kind of a source of hope. Just to share this, sorry. And Colin, maybe we close.
Yeah, so just to close, this is sorry, sorry for a moment if you could just be quiet. So just to close, so this has been brought to you by this is the campaign for the Jesuits for Climate Justice. We work for the Jesuit European Social Centre. That's an advocacy office based in Brussels. We work on different topics. An ecology secretariat. We have a leadership programme and so on. But we're doing this in cooperation with Rome. We've got offices in London. We're in Germany. So when you're at COP, when we're tonight, take our contact details, and going forward, we can work together on this. Just want to say thank you to George and Samuel. We're very lucky to have people like you who advocate for the voiceless. You know, migrants who can't really, who in desperate situations can't speak for themselves. So the effort and the time you put into advocating for them is really appreciated. So just thank you very much. And then secondly, you for the audience, I think it's so important that Catholic voices come to SBs, come to COPs. We hear it all the time. There aren't so many moral voices in the world, or they're certainly decreasing. And I think, you know, faith, hope, and that is a unique thing which we bring to these negotiations. So thank you guys for coming, and please have a beer and some sandwiches afterwards. Also, for those online, I'm sorry the room has been quite noisy, so it might not have been so easy to follow, but your participation has been very much appreciated. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.